All right, now, Zach, had you read or listened to the interview that I did with the vice president?
Yeah, I just re-listened to it again this afternoon. It was a very interesting interview.
But at the time that you made that comment, had you read or listened to it?
Yeah.
Okay. Had you been drinking?
No, I had not.
You weren't on any medication?
No. So I take it that you take issue with my comment.
Well, we're going to parse it a little bit. All right, we're just going to parse it a little bit. Let's start with the very first thing you say. It takes 15 seconds. Cut number 2.
I think what's going on is the inevitable focus on the policies of the Bush and Cheney administration in Iraq, with everything going crazy in Iraq right now. It's very hard to separate the troubles in Iraq today from the troubles that existed almost immediately after the U.S. invasion took place in 2003.
Now, Zach, in fact, the surge happened, peace came to Iraq, elections were held, and President Obama declared it a peaceful democratic state in 2011. So how exactly are you connecting the troubles today with the troubles in 2003?
Well, I think if you want to talk about the surge, right? I mean, the traditional argument here is that an increase of 20 to 30,000 U.S. troops in 2006 basically put down the insurgency and saved the day in Iraq. And then the conservative argument then moves to the idea that Obama sort of abandoned all of that progress, right, in the last few years. I think it's very difficult to make the case that the number of troops that went in the surge was responsible for the progress that you saw in Iraq at that point in time. I think the Sunni awakening, in particular the change that had in internal Iraqi politics, is I think deserves much more credit for the change in circumstances on the ground. And then if you look at the governing of the Maliki government after that Sunni awakening, a lot of Sunnis who believed that they had, felt that they had contributed a lot to the liberation of their country from a violent and oppressive outside force, this Al-Qaeda in Iraq group, which is now, it was going by the name ISIS. Now it's declared itself to be a caliphate and wants to be called an Islamic State. By alienating Sunnis, you alienated the political support you could have for a legitimate state in Iraq.
Zach, I want to try and keep you focused here a little bit.
Sure. So the problem
surge happened. We had an election. They had an election. There was peace in Iraq for a period of at least 3 years. Minor sectarian violence, some loss of life, but generally speaking, stability, and a subsequent election only a few months ago. And the President Obama, declared in 2011 that, in fact, it was a stable country and we could withdraw our troops. And so I think the argument that you're making, whether or not the troops mattered in the surge, you have a distinctly minority point of view on whether or not the American troops mattered in the surge, and I'll let you argue that out with the historians. But clearly you're not arguing that what is happening today has anything to do with George W. Bush, because the country reached stasis. It reached a period of stability, and it has nothing to do with Cheney and Bush.
But clearly, it was a fragile stasis, right? I mean, the basic problem in Iraq is the problem of a power vacuum, and the fact that the Shiite government under Maliki alienated so many Sunnis meant that the peace that we've had over the last relative peace that you've seen in Iraq for the past 3-ish years. I mean, it's been kind of shaky for several months now. Has been the result of a state that's effectively not.
Well, that we agree on. The fact is that when the president did not negotiate a status of forces agreement in 2011, when he and Secretary Clinton failed to do that, they did introduce an unnecessary amount of stability in a country that had achieved stability, fragile or not. It was real. And so when you made that jump in your argument on TV, I thought to myself, well, that's incredibly illogical and not rational, but let's proceed. Let's go to your next statement.
That is the crux of the argument, though, right? I mean, the idea that an additional 10 or 20,000 U.S. troops would have made a significant difference in the power structure in Iraq.
That's not what you said,
though. I think that's a tough empirical case to make. I think the facts on the ground are...
Zach, it's an impossible empirical case to make because it didn't happen. And so you can't make an empirical case about a speculative consequence. It's impossible.
Sure.
To make
I think it's a difficult case to make.
All right, now let's go to your next comment, cut number 3.
And then you have to wonder why the heck the U.S. invaded in 2003, and neither Cheney nor Bush have really given a credible answer for why the U.S. in fact went to war in 2003 in Iraq.
Now, Zach, you might not like the answers they have given, but if you have neglected to read their memoirs, an admission against interest, that tells me you actually don't care whether they've given an answer. You don't want to know what their answer is.
Well, I mean, Dick Cheney was on Megyn Kelly's show just a week or so ago, and she laid out, I think the traditional sort of liberal critique of the Bush and Cheney administration, and his response was, "I fundamentally disagree, and we kept Americans safe. The war in Iraq has been a success." I mean, I think if you look at the intelligence that Cheney cited, there were serious qualms with that intelligence at the time. The response from people like Hillary Clinton, which I think is, certainly for many people who were critics of the Iraq War early on, has been insufficient. She just said in her book, I know this because I listened to the Terry Gross interview on NPR. She said that her decision to vote for the invasion was a mistake.
Zach, but I'm not talking about Hillary. I'm not talking about actually Dick Cheney. I'm talking about Zach Carter. And when Zach Carter says, let's replay it again for you to listen to. This is cut number 3.
And then you have to wonder why the heck the U.S. invaded in 2003. And neither Cheney nor Bush have really given a credible answer for why the U.S. in fact went to war in 2003 in Iraq.
But Zach, you've already said you haven't read either of their memoirs. So how do what you're saying is you, Zach Carter, have not bothered to find out whether or not they've given a credible answer?
I mean, I've listened to them in the media pretty extensively. I would think that an important argument they'd made in their book they'd want to air publicly in other forums. But sure, I mean, if you think there's a credible case that I haven't seen, I would be happy to hear.
No, I'm just pointing out that if you had been in a position, if you had read those books and you had dismissed what they had to say, or even, for example, do you know who Nick Lemon is?
No.
Nick Lemon was the dean of the Columbia School of Journalism, the chief Washington reporter for the New Yorker, and the author of the most, I think, influential piece running up to the war explaining the 6 different reasons that the Bush-Cheney administration had for invading, only one of which was weapons of mass destruction, that you might have a better case to make on the Huffington Post television show that they had no credible answer. But I'm curious about this.
Why the case for the war, right, was, I mean, that Saddam Hussein had been cooperating or collaborating with al-Qaeda, that he had chemical weapons, that he had weapons of mass destruction, and that he was looking to build...
actually, no, they never said al-Qaeda. They said
none of those turned out to be true.
Zach, he never said that about al-Qaeda. He said he was cooperating with terrorists, Abu Nidal, among others, as well as perhaps Zarqawi, though we're not sure about Zarqawi. But what I want to go back to is why do you think...
He said that one of the 9/11 hijackers went to Prague to meet with a senior official of the Iraqi
again, Zach,
service.
You got to stay focused on what Zach said as opposed to the arguments. This is an interview. It's not an argument. I didn't call you up to debate. I just want to know what was going on in your head because I think you represent...
right now, it's what was going on in my head. I mean, I'm laying out for you my perception of the arguments for going to war.
And so let me ask you this. Why do you think...
Those seem like pretty specious claims that have not been held out by history, and so from my point of view, it becomes very difficult to understand why it went to war. People like Hillary Clinton say, "Well, we just got it wrong. We
Zach,
misgauged the intelligence."
But time out,
the argument
Zach.
I've heard from Cheney is that basically things have gone as Cheney had hoped, and that there've been some. Maybe it should have worked out slightly better. We wouldn't have been there as long. But that basically the reasons that he cited have been vindicated.
Well, Zach, again, when you read his memoir, come back and we'll talk about that. But what I'm curious to ask you is, why do you think Bill Clinton bombed Iraq in 1998?
I'm not really familiar with Bill Clinton bombing Iraq in 1998.
Did you know that he did that?
No.
Okay. Let me move on to cut number 4. Cut number 4 from Zach last week.
So Cheney's trying to come up with other stuff to defend his legacy. And when you want to scare people and say, I was always right.
Now, I happen to have reread my entire interview. He never said he was always right. Have you ever heard him say he was always right?
I mean, have you ever heard him apologize or say that he was wrong about the war?
That wasn't. It's not an argument. It's an interview. I was just asking if I missed it.
Right.
If I missed it, I want to know if I missed it. If he ever said I was always right, I'd like, because otherwise it's a straw man, which is bad journalism.
I don't think that's fair. I mean, I think if you listen to that Megyn Kelly interview in particular, where she lays out, a lot of the stuff that I've just been talking about. There were no weapons of mass destruction. There were no chemical weapons. The insurgency was not on its last throes in 2004. All of those things they just all turned out not to be true.
That was a fair and tough interview by Megyn Kelly, but you just accused me of not being fair when, in fact, I'm playing for you your words, but you made up words that the vice president. If someone had not